Nationalism in India. Now let's learn about the Indian nationalism. Indian nationalism refers to the many underlying forces that define the principles of the Indian independence movement. Strongly continues to influence the politics of India, as well as being the heart of many contrasting ideologies that have caused ethnic and religious conflict in Indian society. Indian nationalism often absorbs the consciousness of Indians that prior to 1947, India embodied the broader Indian subcontinent and influenced a part of Asia known as Greater India. We read about the growth of nationalism in India up to the first decade of the 20th century. The First World War, Khilafat Movement and Non-Cooperation Movement. The First World War created a new economic and political situation. It led to a huge increase in defense expenditure, which was financed by war loans and increasing taxes. Customs duties were raised and income tax was introduced. Through the war years, prices increased, doubling between 1913 and 1918, leading to extreme hardships for the common people. Villages were called upon to supply soldiers, and the forced recruitment in rural areas caused widespread anger. Crops failed in many parts of India in 1981 to 1919 and 1920 to 1921. What was Khilafat movement? The Khilafat movement was a very important event in the political history of India. The Muslims of India had a great regard for the Khilafat or Caliphate, which was held by the Ottoman Empire. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire joined the war in favor of Germany, but Turkey and Germany lost the war, and a pact commonly known as Istanbul Accord was concluded between the Allied forces on 3rd November 1918. According to this pact, the territories of Turkey were to be divided among France, Greece and Britain. During the war, the Indian Muslims were in a very awkward position because they had a deep-rooted devotion to the Caliphate. The leader of the Khilafat agitation, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, now wished to initiate a full-fledged non-cooperation movement. Gandhiji supported the movement, and he asked the Congress to campaign against the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and demand for the Swaraj. Here are some of the images depicting the Khilafat movement. And the freedom fighters. The idea of Satyagraha. Mahatma Gandhi returned to India in January 1915 from South Africa. He came from South Africa, where he had successfully fought the racist regime with a novel method of mass agitation, which he called as Satyagraha. Satyagraha is the idea of non-violent resistance, that is fighting with peace, which was started by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, also known as Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi used Satyagraha in the Indian independence movement and also during his earlier struggle in South Africa. Satyagraha helped shape Nelson Mandela's struggle in South Africa under apartheid, Martin Luther King Jr.'s campaign during the civil rights movement in the United States, and many other similar movements. Someone who does Satyagraha was regarded as a Satyagrahi. After arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi successfully organized Satyagraha movement in different places. The three main principles of Satyagraha are Satya, which is truth, Ahimsa, which is non-violence, and Tapasya, meaning meditation. Gandhiji was determined to use these three principles against the British Raj for his country. After arriving in India, he travelled to Champaran in Bihar in the year 1916 to inspire the peasants to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. He then organized a Satyagraha to support the peasants of the Khedar district of Gujarat in 1917. A Satyagraha movement was organized in Ahmedabad in 1918 amongst cotton mill workers. Gandhiji travelled to Champaran, Bihar in 1960. An image can be seen here of his Satyagraha movement. Now let's see what is the Rowlett Act. Rowlett Act gave the government enormous power to repress political activities and allowed detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. This act came into effect on 10th March in the year 1919. In 1919, Gandhiji decided to launch a nationwide Satyagraha against the Rowlett Act. He wanted non-violence against such unjust laws. This act had been passed through the Imperial Legislative Council. The act restricted the freedom of expression and strengthened police powers. In Punjab, the protest movement was very strong, though rallies were organized in various cities. On 10th April 1919, Congress leaders Dr. Satyapal and Dr. Saifuddin Kitlu were arrested and taken to an unknown place. To protest against the arrest, a public meeting was held on 13th April 1919 at Jallianwala Bagh. A large crowd was gathered in the ground of Jallianwala Bagh, some to protest government's new repressive measures and others to attend the annual Baisakhi fair. General Dyer with his troops entered the park, closed the only exit and opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds of people. Rowlett Act in 1919. Non-cooperation movement. Why non-cooperation? Mahatma Gandhi declared in his famous book Hind Swaraj that British rule was established in India with the cooperation of Indians. If Indians refused to cooperate, British rule in India would collapse. How could non-cooperation become a movement? Gandhiji proposed that the movement should unfold in stages. He proposed the non-cooperation movement should begin with boycott of civil services, army, police, courts and legislative councils, schools and foreign goods. Khilafat movement also merged with Gandhiji's non-cooperation movement. Gandhiji became a member of the Central Khilafat Committee. The Nagpur session of Indian National Congress, Gandhiji proposed a non-violent Satyagraha in support of Swaraj and Khilafat. The non-cooperation campaign was successful. An image which shows the non-cooperation movement. Differing threats within the movement. The non-cooperation Khilafat movement began in January 1921. Many social groups participated in this movement. All of them responded to the call of Swaraj, but the term meant different things to different people. The movement in the towns. The movement started with middle class in the cities. Thousands of students left government jobs. Except Madras, the council elections were boycotted in most provinces. There was a dramatic effect on the economic front of non-cooperation. Liquor shops picketed, foreign goods were boycotted, and one and foreign cloth was burnt. In many places, traders refused to trade foreign goods. However, it was not possible to boycott the British goods and services for a long time. Khadi clothes were more expensive than clothes produced in mills. Poor people could not afford to buy khadi clothes. It wasn't possible to boycott the British institution completely because there were not many Indian schools. Lawyers and government employees had to join back to their work. Rebellion in the countryside. The non-cooperation movement spread to the countryside as well. It started with the struggles of peasants and tribals in the countryside. The movement in the countryside was against talukdars and landlords who demanded high rents from the peasants. Peasants had to work in landlords' farms without payment or with very less payment. The tenants do not have any job security. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue, abolition of beggar, and social boycott of landlords. Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramchandra, and a few others set up Awadh Kisan Sabha, an image which shows the peasant movement. Swaraj in the plantation. Workers too had their own understanding of Mahatma Gandhi and the notion of Swaraj. Tea plantation workers in Assam, freedom meant the right to move freely in and out. Under the Act of 1859, plantation workers were not allowed to leave the tea garden without permission. When the workers heard about the non-cooperation movement, thousands of them defied the authorities and left the plantations. They believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and everyone would be given land in their own villages. The vision of these movements were not defined by the Congress program. They were identifying with a movement which went beyond the limits of the immediate locality when they acted in the name of Mahatma Gandhi. Towards the civil disobedience. In February 1922, Mahatma Gandhi decided to withdraw the non-cooperation movement. He felt that the movement was turning violent in many places and Satyagrahis needed to be properly trained. The non-cooperation movement aimed at bringing the government to a standstill but withdrawing every support to administration. The non-cooperation movement aimed at bringing the government to a standstill by withdrawing every support to administration. Civil disobedience is the active, professed refusal to obey certain laws of government. Civil disobedience is a symbolic or ritualistic violation of the law rather than a rejection of the system as a whole. The civil disobedience movement was planned to paralyze the government by mass support. This movement was organized against exploitive laws. Gandhiji had started the agitation for reduction in land revenue, abolition of salt tax, cutting down military expenditure, and levying duty on foreign clothes. Gandhiji during the non-cooperation movement and women during the civil disobedience movement. Next is the Salt March and the civil disobedience movement. What is the Salt March and what is civil disobedience movement? Mahatma Gandhi found in salt a powerful symbol that could unite the nation. On 31st January 1930, he sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. The idea was to make the demands wide-ranging so that all the classes within Indian society could identify with them and everyone could be brought together in a united campaign. Salt was something consumed by the rich and the poor alike, and it was one of the most essential items of food. The tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production, Mahatma Gandhi declared, revealed the most oppressive phase of British rule. Mahatma Gandhi started his famous Salt March accompanied by 78 of his trusted volunteers. The march was over 240 miles from Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati to the Gujarat coastal town of Dandi. The volunteers walked for 24 days about 10 miles a day. On 6 April 1930, he reached Dandi and ceremonially violated the law manufacturing salt by boiling sea water. This marked the beginning of civil disobedience movement. Thousands of people in different parts of the country broke the salt law, manufactured salt and demonstrated in front of government salt factories. As the movement spread, foreign clothes were boycotted and liquor shops were picketed. Peasants refused to pay revenue. The colonial government began arresting the Congress leaders one by one. This led to violent clashes in many places. In this situation, Mahatma Gandhi again decided to call off the movement and entered into a pact with Irvin on 5th March 1931. Gandhiji agreed to participate in Round Table Conference in London, and the government agreed to release the political prisoners. Gandhiji went to London in December 1931. However, negotiations broke down and Gandhiji came back to India. The incredible Salt March was over 250 miles from Sabarmati to Dandi. The sense of collective belonging. Nationalism spread when people begin to believe that they are all part of the same nation. They discover some unity that binds them together. There was also a variety of cultural process through which nationalism captured people's imagination. History and fiction, popular prints, symbols and songs all played a part in the making of nationalism. The identity of the nation helps create an image with which people can identify the nation. It was in the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, the identity of India came to be visually associated with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. In the year 1870, he wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. Later, it was included in his novel Anandamath and are widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Moved by the Swadeshi movement, Abanindranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata. Ideas of nationalism also developed through a movement to revive Indian folklore. Nationalists began recording folk tales and they toured villages to gather folk songs and legends. It was essential to preserve this folk tradition in order to discover one's national identity and restore a sense of pride in one's past. As the national movement developed, nationalist leaders became more and more aware of such icons and inspiring in them a feeling of nationalism. A tricolor flag was designed in Bengal during the Swadeshi movement. By the end of the 19th century, many Indians began feeling that to instill a sense of pride in the nation. A painting by Abanindranath Tagore, he made the image of Bharat Mata on the motherland, and this is Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, who wrote Vande Mataram. See what all we studied in the chapter Nationalism in India. Indian nationalism refers to many underlying forces that define the principles of Indian independence movement. The First World War, Khilafat Movement and non-cooperation movement. The World War I created a new economic and political situation. The Khilafat movement was a very important event in the political history of India. The Muslims of India had a great regard for the Khilafat or Caliphate, which was held by the Ottoman Empire. The idea of Satyagraha, which was introduced by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The Rowlett Act, it gave the government enormous power to repress political activities and allow detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. Mahatma Gandhi decided to launch a nationwide Satyagraha against the Rowlett Act. The non-cooperation movement by Gandhiji. Differing threads within the movement. The non-cooperation movement spread to the countryside as well. Towards the civil disobedience movement, the Salt March and the civil disobedience movement. The Salt March was carried from Sabarmati to Dandi, covering 240 miles. The limits of civil disobedience movement, the sense of collective belonging. Image by Rabindranath Tagore, a painting by Rabindranath Tagore and Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. He introduced Vande Mataram.